The Last Trail by Zane Grey, Chapter 16. The longest day in Jonathan Zane's life, the oddest, the most terrible and complex with unintelligible emotions, was that one in which he learned that the wilderness no longer sufficed for him. He wandered through the forest like a man lost, searching for he knew not what. Rambling along the shady trails, he looked for that contentment which had always been his, but found it not. He plunged into the depth of deep, gloomy ravines, into the fastness of heavy-timbered hollows where the trees hid the light of day. He sought the open grassy hillsides, and roamed far over meadow and plain. Yet something always eluded him. The invisible and beautiful life of all inanimate things sang no more to his heart. The springy moss, the quavering leaf, the telltale bark of the trees, the limpid, misty, eddying pools under green banks, the myriads of natural objects from which he had learned so much, and the manifold joyous life around him, no longer spoke with soul-satisfying faithfulness. The environment of his boyish days, of his youth and manhood, rendered not a sweetness as of old. His intelligence, sharpened by the pain of new experience, told him he had been vain to imagine that he, because he was a borderman, could escape the universal destiny of human life. Dimly he could feel the broadening, the awakening into a fuller existence, but he did not welcome this new light. He realized that men had always turned at some time in their lives to women, even as the cypress leans toward the sun. This weakening of the sterner stuff in him, this softening of his heart, and especially the inquietude and lack of joy and harmony in his old pursuits of the forest trails bewildered him and troubled him some. Thousands of times his borderman trail had been crossed, yet never to his sorrow until now, when it had been crossed by a woman. Sick at heart, hurt in his pride, darkly savage, sad, remorseful, and thrilling with awakened passion, all in turn, he roamed the woodland unconsciously, visiting the scenes where he had formerly found contentment. He paused by many a shady glen and beautiful quiet glade, by gray cliffs and mossy banks, searching with moody eyes for the spirit which evaded him. Here in the green and golden woods rose before him a rugged giant rock, moss-stained and gleaming with trickling water. Tangled ferns, dressed in autumn's russet hue, lay at the base of the green-gray cliff, and circled a dark, deep pool, dotted with yellow leaves. Halfway up, the perpendicular ascent was broken by a protruding ledge, upon which waved broad-leaved plants and rusty ferns. Above, the cliff sheered out with many cracks and seams in its weather-beaten front. The forest grew to the verge of the precipice. A full-foliaged oak and a luxuriant maple, the former still fresh with its dark green leaves, the latter making a vivid contrast with its pale yellow, purple, red, and orange hues, leaned far out over the bluff. A mighty chestnut grasped with gnarled roots deep into the broken cliff. Dainty plumes of goldenrod swayed on the brink. Red berries, amber moss, and green trailing vines peeped over the edge, and every little niche and cranny sported fragile ferns and pale-faced asters. A second cliff, higher than the first, and more heavily wooded, loomed above, and over it sprayed a transparent film of water, thin as smoke, and iridescent in the sunshine. Far above, where the glancing rill caressed the mossy cliff, and shone like gleaming gold against the dark branches with their green and red-purple leaves, lay the faint blue of the sky. Jonathan pulled on down the stream with humbler heart. His favorite waterfall had denied him. The gold that had gleamed there was his sweetheart's hair. The red was her lips. The dark pool with its light and shades, its unfathomable mystery, was like her eyes. He came at length to another scene of milder aspect, an open glade, where the dancing, dimpling brook raced under dark hemlocks, and where blood-red sumac leaves and beech leaves like flashes of sunshine lay against the green. Under a leaning birch he found a patch of purple asters, and a little apart from them, by a mossy stone, a lonely fringed gentian. Its deep color brought him the dark blue eyes that haunted him, and once again, like one possessed of an evil spirit, he wandered along the merry watercourse. But finally pain and unrest left him. When he surrendered to his love, peace returned. Though he said in his heart that Helen was not for him, he felt he did not need to torture himself by fighting against resistless power. He could love her without being a coward. He would take up his life where it had been changed, and live it, carrying this bittersweet burden always. Memory, now that he admitted himself conquered, made a toy of him, bringing the sweetness of fragrant hair and eloquent eyes and clinging arms and dewy lips. 1,000-fold harder to fight than pain was the seductive thought that he had but to go back to Helen, to feel again the charm of her presence, to see the grace of her person, to hear the music of her voice, to have again her lips on his. Jonathan knew then that his trial had but begun, that the pain and suffering of a borderman's broken pride and conquered spirit was nothing, that to steel his heart against the joy, the sweetness, the longing of love was everything. So a tumult raged within his heart. No bitterness nor wretchedness stabbed him as before, but a passionate yearning, born of memory, and unquenchable as the fires of the sun, burned there. Helen's reply to his pale excuses, to his duty, to his life, was that she loved him. The wonder of it made him weak. Was not her answer enough? I love you. 3 words only, but they changed the world. A beautiful girl loved him. She had kissed him, and his life could never again be the same. She had held out her arms to him, and he, cold, churlish, unfeeling brute, had let her shame herself, fighting for her happiness, for the joy that is a woman's divine right. He had been blind. He had not understood the significance of her gracious action. He had never realized until too late what it must have cost her, what heart-breaking shame and scorn his refusal brought upon her. If she ever looked tenderly at him again with those great eyes, or leaned toward him with her beautiful arms outstretched, he would fall at her feet and throw his duty to the winds, swearing his love was hers always, and his life forever. So love stormed in the borderman's heart. Slowly the melancholy Indian summer day waned as Jonathan strode out of the woods into a plain beyond, where he was to meet Wetzel at sunset. A smoky haze, like a purple cloud, lay upon the gently waving grass. He could not see across the stretch of prairie land, though at this point he knew it was hardly a mile wide. With the trilling of the grasshoppers alone disturbing the serene quiet of this autumn afternoon, all nature seemed in harmony with the declining season. He stood a while, his thoughts becoming the calmer for the silence and loneliness of this breathing meadow. When the shadows of the trees began to lengthen and to steal far out over the yellow grass, he knew the time had come, and glided out upon the plain. He crossed it, and sat down upon a huge stone which lay with one shelving end overhanging the river. Far to the west the gold-red sun, too fiery for his direct gaze, lost the brilliance of its under circle behind the fringe of the wooded hill. Slowly the red ball sank. When the last bright gleam had vanished in the dark horizon, Jonathan turned to search the wood and plain. Wetzel was to meet him at sunset. Even as his first glance swept around, a light step sounded behind him. He did not move, for that step was familiar. In another moment the tall form of Wetzel stood beside him. "I'm about as much behind as you was ahead of time," said Wetzel. "We'll stay here for the night, and be off early in the morning." Under the shelving side of the rock, and in the shade of the thicket, the bordermen built a little fire and roasted strips of deer meat. Then, puffing at their long pipes, they sat for a long time in silence, while twilight let fall a dark, gray cloak over river and plain. "Legget's move up the river was a blind, as I suspected," he said Wetzel presently. "He's not far back in the woods from here, and seems to be waiting for something or somebody. Brandt and 7 redskins are with him. We'd have a good chance at them in the morning. Now we've got 'em a long ways from their camp, so we'll wait and see what deviltry they're up to." "Maybe he's waiting for some Injun band," suggested Jonathan. "There's redskins in the valley and close to him, but I reckon he's barking up another tree. Suppose we run into some of these Injuns?" "I'll have to take what comes," replied Wetzel, lying down on a bed of leaves. When darkness enveloped the spot, Wetzel lay wrapped in deep slumber, while Jonathan sat against the rock, watching the last flickerings of the campfire. Chapter 16.